Hello and welcome back. And that's right, today we're talking about a new Minisforum NAS. That's right, today we're talking about the Minisforum N5 Air. Now, the reason I went new in that incredibly sarcastic way is because originally in mid-2025, when Minisforum rolled out the N5 Pro and the N5, it has to be said that the N5 Pro was expensive but very powerful, and a lot of users flocked to the N5, so much so that it sold out ridiculously fast. Fast forward to now, and alongside the N5 Max version that we talked about during CES, which has got a few hardware configuration upgrades, and we'll talk about that in the future, the N5 Air serves as an economical entry into that product family, replacing, from what I can see, the standard N5. Priced at $499, it arrives with an AMD Ryzen 8-core 16-thread processor. It also supports up to 96 gig of non-ECC DDR5 memory. It also has, alongside the 5 SATA base and inside 3 M.2 NVMe's, 2 of them at Gen 4x1, 1 of them at Gen 4x2. It also arrives with a small 2232 SSD module inside that has the NAS operating system. That is MinisCloud OS. More on that later on in the video. But alongside that, on the rear of the device, we have got a 10 gig network port, a 5 gig network port. We've got an Oculink upgrade slot and a PCIe upgrade slot. Physical times 16, but it's actually in reality a Gen 4x4 PCIe upgrade at $499. What the actual what? Now, we got to put our feet firmly back on the ground, because we have to remember that $499 price tag is bare bones. It does arrive, as mentioned, with an SSD inside with the operating system, but it's a 64 gig SSD. And yes, you can write over it if you choose to with your own OS of choice. At the very least, you've got your operating system drive taken care of. But what about your RAM and your hard drive? Have you seen the price of RAM these days? 16 gig is what I would recommend for a ZFS profile solution. Again, whether you're going to go with TrueNAS or you're going to play around with their own software, which is ZFS, by the way. 16 gig is going to set you back minimum 150 to 200 nicker out the gate. So again, that $499 price tag has clearly been picked because of the rising cost of a lot of other components in the server and just general computer market right now. But the other thing we have to highlight is, what is exactly the difference between this and the N5? Because for this to replace this, there must be reason, there must be logic. Now, there is physical design differences. The front panel has been changed from that glossy one there, which is a real fingerprint magnet, into this one here, which is a lot more matte effect. Also, the enclosure has changed to plastic rather than aluminium all the way through. The result is that the newer generation device is actually a kilo lighter there between the two of them, which is absolutely huge. Another thing, and something I actually criticised in a recent video when I was revisiting the N5, is to do with the network configuration, because I believe it was in the should you buy, even though the N5 has both a 10 gig and a 5 gig port, it's actually using 2 different network controllers from 2 different brands. One of them a Realtek, the other one a Quantia. Whereas the newer generation device is taking advantage of Realtek NIC controllers on both the 5 gig and the 10 gig. 8125 and 8126 and 8127 controllers there internally there. They're far more efficient and they are affordable, and it's just another way in which they've brought the price down. But apart from that, the design is largely identical. It's just plastic instead of metal. But overall, I still love this design aesthetic, the removable tray for maintenance and accessing as well as upgrading. The individual trays are plastic trays. I'm still gutted they're not using lockable trays. I know the Max version is going to have lockable trays. It still just bugs me that although it's got the spring loaded, it doesn't have the lockable trays there inside. And again, upgrading the memory, upgrading the SSD, swapping them all out, it's all done via that base level panel there with additional cooling on either side. So we've got the main cooling there that sits above each of the M.2 NVMe's. Again, these are 22110 full length SSD slots as well for larger expandable ones. Not that anyone can afford them these days. But on the other side, you've got that physical times 16 that we mentioned, alongside a vapor chamber for that AMD processor running through, and SODIMM memory there. Now, that is important as well, because of the rising cost of SODIMM memory and RDIMM and UDIMM as well. The result is I'm seeing more and more solutions arrive these days with pre-soldered memory. Look at that Ugreen solution, that AI NAS, arriving with fixed memory out the gate. It's a lot of memory, but it's fixed memory, and you end up having to pay more for the overall solution, even if you aren't planning on using 64 gig of RAM. So the fact they're still committing to SODIMM on this, and a lot of users might have expected them on this to fix it at 8, 16 or 32, credit to them. And despite the noticeable price saving this presents compared to the N5 and the N5 Pro, the PCIe layout here remains the same. So for example, the Oculink port is Gen 4x4. That's an 80 gigabit Oculink port there to play with there, all ready to rock. The USB 4 port there is a 20 gig USB 4. And not just that, this system supports direct USB 4 point-to-point connectivity. It's a Thunderbolt NAS. So again, lovely stuff at $499. Again, we've got the system set up with the PCIe and the M2s as mentioned at 4x1, 4x1 and 4x2. The PCIe layout on this $499 system is absolutely bonkers. And the SATA bays are already on a 20 gigabit connection as well, which you're never going to saturate, regardless of even if you use SATA SSDs running in there back with that SATA controller inside. It is still the N5. It's still the N5 like the predecessor, and it has seen some of the tweaks and the bells and whistles over the time. The early generations of this, I know there were some users that reported early doors about having difficulties with SATA drive drop, and I think some of that has been resolved in later revisions of this. I didn't see any of that in my testing. But still, nonetheless, the N5 Air is still trying to present itself as a more economical alternative to the N5 and the N5 Pro. But what about noise? What about temps? What about power consumption? Let's tackle the noise first. When I've done a lot of my noise testing, a lot of NAS reviews, one of the biggest problems I have is which storage drives I'm going to use, because different drives make different noise. So for a period of what I'm going to try to do when I do my noise test is try to utilize only SATA SSDs, because it eliminates the hard drive noise in its entirety, and therefore when you choose to buy larger, bigger, more industrial hard drives, you have to be prepared that they are going to make more noise. I'm giving you the base numbers. So when I had the system set up with SATA SSDs and in idle, the noise was only around 35 to 38 dBA. Much like its predecessor, you can't control the fans. You can set it at BIOS, and it does have automatic sensors, but within the OS, I wasn't able to find any way to control those fans manually. Now, what about active use? With active use, I ramped the CPU up as best I could with all kinds of indexing and containers, forcing the fans to kick on. I then went into the BIOS settings to really tweak it so it would go to max, and then the noise hit around 46 to 48 dBA. Now, that is actually quieter than its predecessor, or at least the N5 and the N5 Pro, and a big part of that is the plastic chassis again. What about the temps though? How did that reflect on temperatures? Now, a big part of the metal chassis actually assists as dissipation. So I didn't expect the numbers to be especially high, but they were lower than I expected. And I ended up trusting the internal temp numbers more than I did the external. The thermal imaging camera showed me like 36 to 38 on the individual hard drive bays there, 28 with the front panel there on the front degrees, 33 at the top, 31 on the rear, and around 36 to 40 on the rear ports. So respectful numbers, but I do wonder about the plastic chassis kind of trapping some of the heat in a way that the metal one would have dissipated that heat a little bit more. They aren't bad numbers, but I don't think my temps are ever going to be representative of this device running for months and months in your own home lab. Then there was power consumption. Again, just like I mentioned with the hard drives and the noise testing, I ran this on SATA SSDs for these parts of the tests, just to give you the baseline of the system itself. But just keep in mind that all the numbers I'm showing you, maybe add between 5 and 7 watts per hard drive. If you're going to go hard drives, the numbers I'm presenting you with SATA SSDs, those SATA SSDs consume next to sod, or barely a watt or two each. So when the system had just the SSDs inside, sitting there fully in idle, I only saw power consumption of around 26 to 27 watts. Very respectable numbers there, and again at $499, lovely stuff, given how much electricity costs these days. Now, what about active use? So I was accessing the SSDs there, but more appropriately, I was looking at the CPU itself. I was maxing that bad boy out, and in terms of power consumption with the CPU at max, I saw it around 81 to 83 watts with full CPU utilization. Again, that is not factoring in the power draw of individual hard drives. So you're going to have to factor that in for yourself. Now, when it came to performance was largely identical to what I've already seen previously in the N5 and the N5 Pro. It's got 10 gig and 5 gig port there on the rear that can be combined with SMB multi-channel. But if you've got this device populated with hard drives, I had 4 Seagate 4TB drives inside in a RAID Z1. I saw performance there in both AJA and ATO of around 650 read over around 5 to 525 right there. When I was utilizing the SSDs, I saw it creeping, with the SATA SSDs at least, creeping a lot higher towards 800 or so, up and down. But at that point, it ended up being a case of having to think about truncating those ports there on the rear, and I didn't have the device set up in that way to do that. Bench testing the M.2 NVMe's inside ended up fully saturating the 10G easily, but again, that didn't really surprise me too much. This device, I would say, with the network connections it has, you are going to be easily able to fully saturate the 10 gig and the 5 gig if you are relying on the M.2 NVMe's. Forget the main archive storage area, but with 3 M.2s inside, with 20 gigabits per second, 20 gigabits per second, and 40 gigabits per second bandwidth afforded to them, and the network connections providing each of them around 10 to 20 gigs each for the 5 and 10 respectively. Fully saturating this is going to be pretty straightforward then. Again, much like it was with the N5 and the N5 Pro, the system fully capable of it. And for those thinking about multimedia on this, because it isn't an Intel CPU, so you don't have things like QuickSync on board, and transcoding on AMD chips is, well, it's debatable. I would say when I played one of my heftiest 8K files on this device, that is a 60 frames per second 8K mental file that I was running inside this, I only saw max of around between 9 and 11% CPU utilization. Now that obviously shot up extraordinarily when I went into transcoding, because this took advantage of software transcoding. But still, I think at $499 for multimedia, as long as you're not planning on much transcoding, this thing at $499 makes it tremendously competitive for things like Jellyfin and Plex. But what about the software it arrives with? When I reviewed the original M5 and the N5 Pro, that software was in beta. Unfortunately, it is in a newer variation of beta that this thing arrived with, and I don't know whether that is the system in general still remaining in beta, or just that the software this arrived with being still in beta apropos of this device in itself. But let's talk about MinisCloud OS, what it can do and what it can't do. Now, if you'd had watched my N5 review last year, then chances are there isn't a huge amount that you're going to see here that you didn't already know about. The MinisCloud OS is built on CU-Yun operating system, a Chinese NAS operating system that often is mixed up, myself included, with FNOS or FINU OS. They are utilizing that third-party semi-open source NAS operating system to build this OS that's included with the system. But I think it'll be fair to say that most users using this system are going to be looking at TrueNAS or Unraid. Nevertheless, I do think we should give it the old college try, because realistically, there is a lot to like here. It's just a shame that the apps and services still don't feel quite finished. And again, given that we were talking about this OS last year with the original N5 Pro, it's a real shame that I still have to label this as an unfinished OS. Indeed, the version I'm running right now, as you can see here, version 2.1.10, is still a beta build. So from here, what do we get with it? Well, largely the full system management with a few bells and whistles that I've not seen elsewhere. For example, we have a gateway system where we can log into this device either as a personal, private or group space, depending on where we are accessing the device, either remotely or on the local area network. Additionally, although I am using the desktop client tool here, we could access it via the web browser or on the mobile application that I'll be showing you later in the video. We've got our applications for multimedia, so whether that is we're using it for photography, video searching here, facial recognition, whether we're going to be utilizing it for multimedia like music, whether we're going to be utilizing it for video files, also taking advantage of that HDMI output, those options are open to us there. And again, with AI Edge photo recognition there built in as well, which is reasonable, kind of what we're used to here, though some of you might just immediately switch to image. The option is there for you. The same goes with creating that multi-backup solution, depending on whether you can be backing up from the local client device you're accessing, or you're going to be accessing and synchronizing with a cloud space perhaps. Those options, again, are there. They're not, I would argue, as fleshed out or as fully featured as Synology DSM, QNAP, QTS, etc. But at the very least, the options are there. And given that most of the applications and services are containerized, you can connect other app repositories to kind of install your own first or third party app of choice, depending on which ones are included in the App Center or whether you're going to be choosing to access your own select repository. File service management and remote access management is all pretty user friendly, and how to set the device up to your own tailored needs or adding additional layers and barriers such as integrating or not enabling peer-to-peer networking or utilizing specific account control to access things like SMB or other file services can be enabled. And again, it's quite bespoke system to system, as well as pre-selecting which repositories, which file folder structure to index over time. The options are open to you. Some of it's actually pretty neatly laid out, but we have to at least accept that when we're looking at this, there is definitely a design philosophy that feels inconsistent. So for example, when we go into creating storage area here, it doesn't quite decide when we look at different apps and services and the way they are laid out and designed, what exactly this system is going for in terms of how it's supposed to look, how it's going to relay information. Sometimes it just feels like there's too many things going on at once. And again, that's fine. This is still in beta, but just if you are looking at the N5 Air, do keep in mind that the base level OS that's included with it, although it does mean this machine is a turnkey solution, this NAS operating system is nowhere near as mature or as well established or arguably as consistent as some of the other operating systems in the market right now. At the very least, you do still have advanced and easy options for those varying skill sets for those accessing their system, and with support of those ZFS advantages, be they for RAID storage areas or some of the inline stuff for caching, compression, compaction, that sort of thing. They're all integrated here thanks to that native use of ZFS. But some limitations, I'm not sure if it comes down to the fact they're using Yuan OS or the fact that they are utilizing this hardware architecture. Some things, simple stuff, like if I go into the device monitoring here, I'm not able to have fan control, and that's quite a simple thing. Generally speaking, again, on AMD platforms, not quite so straightforward. And again, we are talking about a removable main board here, so the amount of control to the external casing and no SATA bays going into that removable board probably presents its own barriers. But I don't like the fact that I can't increase or decrease the fans at my whim. I do have, standard air gapping stuff, so in the power, I can go ahead and create a power schedule of powering on and powering off at different times of day. And the same goes if I want to take advantage of, scheduled hibernation or just the system powering itself down. Network management is still pretty darn good. There are elements of the control that I genuinely do like, but I'm by no means going to say it's extensive. And also, I'm not going to say that the software and the hardware meld together very seamlessly, as I've seen from other turnkey NAS solutions. But going back to my earlier point, this is not a system that I think most users are going to, or at least they shouldn't really, consider buying based on the software. It's the hardware you're shopping for here. It's still nice that they've included a baseline OS, but it does still need work. And if you're okay with that, and maybe you want to give it a whirl for a few hours and then immediately switch over to your true NAS, to your Unraid, Hex OS, Open Media Vault, whatever, it's there for you. I would argue, though, that thanks to that Yuan software, that utilizing the desktop, the mobile application, I should say, is actually a little bit more consistent. Now, what has been added since the original N5 Pro review? What exactly has been scaled up in this software? Well, the things that have changed and have been improved upon, we'll go with probably one of the biggest ones, and that is to do with the VM tool here. Notwithstanding, you can host multiple VMs on this device, and again, that CPU, although it's not as aggressive as the one in the Pro, still pretty darn good with 16 cores to play with. There's a lot of VM fun to be had here, but also you can go ahead and immediately download from mirrored repositories different versions of different ISOs for your VM of choice. And again, you can run them. There's a few different options there. Although I'm not quite sure why someone would download a VM of TrueNAS inside this software. It's still nice, the options there. I think most users are going to quite enjoy installing Ubuntu or Windows VMs. I would have liked to have seen perhaps an Android VM download there. We've seen that before in that lovely little R1 box from them. But you can manage those VMs pretty neatly. And again, it's nice to have that option here. The same goes if we move forward. You've got other options such as native Time Machine backup support there. So again, one for the Mac users there. But nothing really kind of OS wide there for non-Mac users. Then we've got things like the SAN manager, so iSCSI support, at least manageable via the desktop application, is available here for you to create those iSCSI LUNs and set up your targets there for kind of raw native file folder access. Then on top of that, you've got things like the HDMI manager now via the desktop that allows you to manage media files to output via directly HDMI. Then you've got a download manager that allows you not only to download those VMs from within that application, but also adding your own task, a BT link there, an FTP, NZP, that sort of thing. You can add those all in pretty darn easily. And then finally, you've got the password vault there for creating that encrypted, protected extra layer of storage. The options are there. They have added to and they have continued to develop within this software. But I think it would be fair to say that while the original source coded OS has been developed, they've integrated those existing things into the Minisforum N5 NAS series. But what about the mobile app? The design philosophy of the mobile application just feels a lot smoother. The apps and services do run exactly how you'd like them to be run. And also, the majority of the apps and services are here. So whether it is you're going to be setting up localized backups, as you can see, the backup options that are afforded to the mobile application are significantly more tailored than we've seen previously on the desktop appliance. Obviously, a lot of that comes down to the client application we're using, but I'm still certain that the Windows client that we were just accessing probably could have been a little bit more tailored to Windows in a similar way to what we're seeing here for the Android application. Same goes if I want to utilize the HDMI output and select files with the mobile application to then output over HDMI. It's responsive, it's quick, it does the job. If I want to access some of those files and folders using the Edge AI stuff there, the options are pretty good and pretty consistent all the way along, whether it is I'm using the Edge AI to recognize faces and then give them names there in the background, or if I want to utilize some of the other multimedia applications to stream to this single app appliance, such as music and video. The options are open to me, and the control of some of those containerized applications being native are all pretty good too. Whether it is you want to use the chat appliance there between different users, the notepad application, it's still pretty good. It just feels a little bit more consistent here on the on the mobile appliance than it did on the desktop. So there is still work to be done. And if you are going to set this device up, do keep in mind that when you do set it up, you can do the whole dang thing with just the mobile appliance anyway. You've got that option. But still there are things missing. Things like iSCSI support there is missing. Things like two-factor authentication are missing. There are still gaps. But again, this is not an app or service that I think most users are going to look at the N5 for. People are looking at the N5 Air because they want to use third-party NAS operating systems, and almost certainly going to whip out their M.2 inside for something a little bit more substantial and take advantage of that bay sooner. Still, credit to Minisforum for including this NAS operating system, because there will be people that will, try this out for a while, and maybe that'll be enough for them. I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, but at $499, it's really hard to critique this. I really hope Minisforum have learnt some lessons on the arguably not fully baked rollout of the N5 and the N5 Pro from what you've seen in the months since those were released. And I hope a lot of those lessons have been learnt here with this device. Through my testing, it's been solid as a rock, not only for the stuff that I've done for this review, but also a follow-up video we're working on with TrueNAS on this, as well as Hex OS running on this system, just to sort of see how it works with third-party OS. This video, this review, is about reviewing this device as a turnkey, as we always do here. That's why we've not included TrueNAS or Unraid or Zimmer or any of those other operating systems on this device. We've got to provide it for this review as a turnkey NAS solution that it purports to be. I'd say in terms of hardware, it delivers. I would say in terms of software, MinisCloud OS still does not feel finished. And I think the idea of that OS arriving on a 22110 SSD populating one of those three bays and not a little bit of eMMC knocked to one side is disappointing. Another thing I will say, I don't know how everyone's going to feel about the change in the chassis. Yes, it's still a saving of $100, but some people like metal NASs for its dissipation there, and they've got it plugged away enough that the noise doesn't bother them too much. That said, the fact that they've managed to slice $100 nicker off the price of the N5 at least, and still maintain 10 gig, 5 gig, Oculink, PCIe, 3M.2 NVMe's, that slide out profile, and just generally a solid 5-base system, again at 4,999, I just can't fault that. But keep an eye on this to see what happens, because if you're worried about being an early adopter, given that the N5 and the N5 Pro seem to have a shaky little start there, maybe sit on the fence a little bit longer. But I say right now, me personally, I'm giving it a big old tick. What do you guys think? Did you buy the N5 or the N5 Pro and you had some of the teething difficulties that we've touched on? Let me know in the comments below. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. There's links in the description below to get hold of this for yourself. So if you want to support what we do, use those links. We get a commission. It's just me and Ed. It allows us to keep doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.